Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Bertnoli, Executive Director, Job Service North Dakota. I'm excited to be your host today. I want to thank you all for joining us for our webinar, Exploring International Student Pathways to Maximize Your Talent Strategy. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items to cover. We have muted the chat and the microphones during this webinar to provide you with the best experience. If time allows, upon conclusion of our presentations, we will open the chat for your questions, comments, and feedback. It's very important for us to get every question, comment, and feedback that you have. So we'll be providing an email address at the end where you can submit your questions, comments, and feedback in that format. Over the course of the next week or so, we will summarize all Q&A and we will distribute that information to all participants attending today's session. Although we are recording our webinar today, SHRM recertification credits will only be available to those attending our live webinar. North Dakota SHRM will be sharing that code soon for those of you seeking credit. We are enthusiastic to be here with you today to create awareness and explore the opportunities that hiring international students may create for your organization. If you joined us for the work-based learning webinar last month, you heard me say that the state's role is to bring education and employers together to create a well-prepared, competitive workforce. Like work-based learning, the hiring of international students is one more way we can supplement the workforce and can help you maximize your overall talent strategy. I'd like to start out by sharing with you how we got here today. Last year, Lisa Chong from Malaysia, a human resources colleague of mine, visited North Dakota. We gave her a tour of Bismarck, and we also met and toured with Bismarck State College and the University of Mary. To my surprise, UMary provided an international student to give us their tour. That international student was Andrea Peter, who is also from Malaysia. That gesture, kindness, and overall respect completely moved my guest, Lisa, and those of us on that tour. We learned that Andy had essentially been referred to UMary by previous family members who had attended there as well. At the time, Andy was pursuing her bachelor's degree in behavioral health, and she just graduated this past April. During our tour, she shared that she had struggled to find a job in the area when she first arrived in Bismarck. With the current workforce shortage, I was curious about Andrea's struggles to find a job, so I've had several discussions with her related to her pursuit of work. I also found an opportunity to educate our state leaders about the obstacles international students have when seeking employment in North Dakota. My conversations with Andrea also prompted a meeting with Shelby Emdike from the University of Mary, who you will hear from today. We held a few discussions related to the possibility of engaging employers to create statewide awareness and to inform and educate employers about the opportunities that exist when hiring international students. Those discussions brought us here to this webinar today. Through storytelling and hearing from students and employers, we want to create awareness of some of the barriers international students have when seeking and obtaining employment here in North Dakota. Andrea and Jackson are two international students who have courageously stepped up to share their personal experiences when seeking and obtaining employment. Personally, their stories have had a great impact on me. If they hadn't, we wouldn't be here today. Tony Wood is the president of Mountain Plains LLC, Jackson's employer, and he has graciously agreed to share his journey in pursuit of the American dream and how, like him, international students are in pursuit of that same dream. Tony's story has impact not only in sharing his experience with hiring international students, but also because he has a personal experience with immigration and international students. Our featured speakers are subject matter experts who will provide you with a ton of information today about career pathways for international students, immigration, compliance, and much more. I'll be introducing each of our speakers for their respective presentations, so let's get started. First up, we have Andrea Peter. Andrea immigrated to the United States from Malaysia at age 17 to pursue a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology at the University of Mary. As I mentioned, she graduated this past April and is currently in the state of Virginia in pursuit of her doctorate in clinical psychology. Prior to her recent North Dakota departure, she was employed at the Abused Adult Resource Center in Bismarck. With that, Andrea, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pat. Next slide, please. So as mentioned before, I moved to Bismarck, North Dakota in 2020. I recently moved to Virginia, where I'll be pursuing my doctorate in clinical psychology at Divine Mercy University. And there I would want to specialize in substance abuse treatment and childhood trauma. And as Pat mentioned, I just graduated from the University of Mary in April with a bachelor's in science and psychology and a minor in addiction counseling. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how I met Pat. It was actually not planned. I was working at the University of Mary as a student ambassador. It was my second job on top of being employed at the Abused Adult Resource Center that summer. And I was told to come back to campus. I had plans that day, but I was told to come back to campus to give a tour to someone that was from Malaysia. And being from Malaysia, they told me that it'd be a good idea for me to give the tour just so that that person would be welcomed. And that's how I had the opportunity to meet Pat, and that's how I ended up here. And I'm very grateful for that. Next slide, please. During that tour with Pat, I had the opportunity to talk to him about my struggles with finding a job. And I told him that even finding employment on campus was difficult, as priority was given to US citizens over international students, even though sometimes I felt that I was more qualified for the jobs that I was applying for. But thankfully, I was able to learn about CPT and OPT, which is what Shelby will discuss about later, and realize that I could find a job off campus for at least 1 year. And that's how I landed a job with the Abused Adult Resource Center. I had been to many interviews before and I was given hope many times, but then I would find out that because of my status as an international student, I was not qualified for the job. But I explained my situation to the Abused Adult Resource Center, or also known as AARC, and they decided to take a chance on me. I was recently visiting with my boss, who is the director of the Abused Adult Resource Center. Her name is Michelle Erickson, and she told me that I told her how I was doing this webinar, and she told me that in the long run, it would have been cheaper for her to keep me here and then to hire a new person and train them, because she was able to sponsor me to work another year after I graduated. So I was very grateful for that. It was very touching to hear that from her, considering how many people didn't want to take a chance on me to hire me. That picture that is in the slide right now is a picture of me holding a certificate of working for over a year at the Abused Adult Resource Center, and that's my certificate of recognition. And on top of the job of being a monitor at the Family Safety Center, so that's where I worked for most of my time at the Abused Adult Resource Center, I worked as a Family Safety Center monitor where I would supervise court-ordered visits. I added the job of being a resident advocate at the domestic violence shelter. I'm so grateful that ARC took a chance on me because I learned so much from this job, and I would not be where I am if I did not have the opportunity I was given this past year. And it allowed me to be a step closer to following my dreams. Next slide, please. Even though my time in North Dakota was challenging with finding employment, I still managed to form meaningful relationships. And I'm in Virginia right now, but I am missing North Dakota, and I'd like to say that it's home. I've been talking to the people here, and I've been referring to North Dakota as home and talking about my friends at home, and I really do miss them. And I'm glad that I was able to be there for 3 years and form some meaningful relationships that I will be able to keep for the rest of my life. And I stand by the fact that coming to North Dakota was one of the best decisions I've ever made.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm grateful to you for not only sharing your story here today, but for being brave enough to share your struggles with finding employment here in North Dakota and with me a few months ago. You raised an important issue, one that likely would have gone unnoticed had you not had the courage to share your story. Employers, you've heard from Andrea, a talented young lady with a bright future. I want you to remember her the next time you have an international student apply for a job with you. And Andrea, we are grateful that you're being an advocate for Team North Dakota while you're in Virginia. And our next speaker, like Andrea, Jackson Penner, is another international student who is here today to also share his story. Jackson grew up in Northland, Manitoba, Canada. He attended the University of Mary, where he participated on the track and field team and graduated with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering. He had a brief internship with Moore Engineering before being hired by Mountain Plains Engineering in their power division, routing and designing power lines to oil pads, farms, water wells, etc. Jackson, we're elated that you're here with us today, and we're grateful for your representation of Team North Dakota, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Pat. Like Pat said, I am originally from Canada, grew up in a small town in northern Manitoba. And so kind of growing up there, a big part of my life was sports. I played volleyball, basketball, ran track there. And then I had the opportunity to run for track field for the University of Mary. While I was there, I got my bachelor's in civil engineering. I graduated, and I was able to get a brief internship with more engineering before I was hooked up with Tony Wood with Mountain Plains. Do you mind going forward a couple slides? You can go forward one more slide, please. So just kind of a rundown of what was kind of my work authorization and how have I been working in America for the past couple of years. So coming out of university, I was able to get an OPT, optional practical training. This, for me, was an extension onto my existing student visa. I was allowed to work for 1 year, and this was really just a great starting point for me in that I didn't have to have a work author or a sponsorship from Mountain Plains or from any other employers. I was just able to start working right away. And then since I graduated with a civil engineering, I was working in a STEM field. I was able to attach an additional 2 years onto my OPT. And so I was able to work in America for the first 3 years without any sponsorship from my employer. Everything was handled between myself and the University of Mary. And that's it was really nice to just start off like that. Recently, I had to move to my TN visa. And so that's a visa for qualified professionals from Mexico and Canada. And so that's for 3 years that I can do that, and that can be renewed indefinitely. So I mean, I could theoretically be working on a TN visa for the rest of the time that I'm working in America. And then I just kind of want to talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that international students might be facing. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So first one is that it can be difficult finding employment. If you're going through a lot of the just job offers, you'll see that authorization is, or this job is not, no work authorization we offer for this job, so you can't get a sponsorship. That can be, a very disappointing sight for a lot of international students. Another aspect is that a lot of this paperwork, it can be quite pricey to kind of go through. And when you're coming out of college, you typically don't have a lot of money for all this paperwork. The next thing is just kind of there could be a pretty long time waits for this. So, you could be waiting in America, unfortunately, for months while your paperwork is being worked on, while it's being authorized. And that could be a kind of a challenging time for a lot of international students. And that you're kind of wondering if you, maybe should have went home and tried to find a job there. It feels like that might have been the easier option. And then can you go ahead one more slide? Once you do find employment, there can be a couple challenging aspects to that. One thing, the healthcare in the US can be quite a bit different. And so, in the US, it's typically tied to your work. And, if you're unaware of that, it can be a bit of a change of pace. For a lot of people that are coming out of the US, that could be a pretty different experience. Another thing is just kind of the labor laws are, that obviously vary between country to country. And so that's just kind of two aspects that I think if you're an employer and looking to hire an international student, it would be very beneficial to just kind of sit down and talk to them. Unfortunately, a lot of people, they kind of don't go through this process if you're an international student seeking employment in the US. And it can be a very confusing time for a lot of them. And I just kind of want to talk about some of the real benefits of hiring international students. Can you go to the next one? So number one is that if you're gonna take the time and work through all the challenging aspects of hiring international student, that's relationship building right there. If you're willing to go through all that with us, then that as an international student, that's who I want to work for. If you're willing to work with me, that's great. That's who I want to work for. Another aspect is just that can give you the competitive edge if you're accessing a new talent pool that some of your competitors might not be. That's going to be a great competitive edge for you. Finally, just if you're bringing in individuals from out of the country, you know, they might have different ideas, different mindsets, and that can be a great way to just bring in fresh mindset to stimulate your company's growth. And so hopefully that kind of just gives you a bit of a rundown of my experience and why it might be a great idea to hire an international student. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us, Jackson. You raised some great points about the differences between Canada and US laws and health benefits, which are probably things that we never even thought of before. It certainly emphasizes the need to be aware of those differences and to communicate with our newly hired employees. We're happy that you were able to overcome your obstacles and get hired by our next speaker, Tony Wood. Tony is the president of Mountain Plains LLC. Tony was born and raised in the Rocky Mountains with no plans to leave Idaho. Track and field drew him to the University of Mary, where he earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in business administration. It was at the University of Mary where he discovered the opportunity, values, and culture known only by North Dakota. During the summers as a college student, he worked as a roughneck on oil drilling rigs. Upon graduating, he found himself hooked on the Bakken and the opportunity it presented. In 2009, he founded Mountain Plains LLC. Today, the company employs 40 to 50 team members and serves North Dakota and Montana with engineering, land surveying, and utility locating services. Welcome, Tony, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Pat, and thank you all those spending time attending this webinar today. With that, just a little bit further on my story. As Pat mentioned, I was born and raised in Idaho. As you'll see on this next slide, I'm very accustomed to the Rocky Mountains, and never did I anticipate that I would ever find myself in North Dakota. But the opportunity to pursue something that was very dear to my heart, athletics in college, was just a huge draw. And I got the opportunity to attend the University of Mary and compete on their track and field team. And then eventually, through opportunities only North Dakota presented both in that time and today, I've been blessed with the opportunity to own my own business. I currently live in Watford City with my wife, and we have 4 children we're very, very proud of. And with that, that's really, my introduction to this international comes from my extended family. A little history there. My father-in-law and mother-in-law tried for 10 years, the first 10 years of their marriage, to conceive without success. And they became foster parents, which brought different people into their home. But eventually, something I'm very grateful for is that they adopted a girl at birth from Guatemala, who is now my wife. And my wife, Kylie, has a sister as well named Tony, who essentially, once my in-laws adopted Kylie, they found out shortly thereafter that Kylie's biological mother had conceived again and was expecting another child, and they agreed to adopt that child at birth as well. So my wife and her sister have been together in this family in North Dakota, and my in-laws have just continued to open their doors to people of need in different backgrounds and situations. Our extended family today includes 3 young men from Nigeria, a young lady from Panama, and my brother-in-law is from Dominican Republic. And so this is really my first introduction directly to people of different cultures and backgrounds. And with that, I kind of want to talk about how that plays into the workforce professionally with these students. And one of the things that I just find so incredible that has to bring up is the concept of the American dream. Some might question of how vibrant it is, but I truly believe that we live in the best country in the world, and it's because of this ability for us to, through hard work and sacrifice and risk, pursue an opportunity to make our lives better than it might have been. And I believe personally that my story is one of those as well. I'm very appreciative. When I moved out here to attend the University of Mary, it's 1,000 miles away from my hometown. I had never spent more than 1 week. In fact, I don't think I had spent 1 entire week away from my parents. So, it felt like a big sacrifice, a big intimidating step to pursue, at that time, my dream of college athletics. And I can't help but see the reward that that's played in my life, and think of just how incredible it is for us to be able to step out and attempt these things regardless of where we come from or what our last name is, so on and so forth. And I just think of these students as models of that. You know, the United States of America was built on the backs of immigrants who wanted to take a chance to make something better in their lives generations ago. And here we are today with young men and women that still see an opportunity to come and improve themselves through those risks and hard work and such. And you might ask why this slide depicts a picture of a backpack and a mattress. And it plays into one of my kind of extended brothers, if you will, through my in-laws, Bartholomew. And on this next screen, I've got some pictures of some of these family members. And Bartholomew, on the right-hand side, he came here at 16 years old. And when he arrived at the airport in Bismarck, everything he owned was in a knapsack on his back. He had never slept on a mattress before in his life. He had never had his own room. You can imagine, just with that testament alone, you know, how his life might vary from his peers when he arrived here in the United States. He recently completed his bachelor's degree, played football for NDSU. He's currently working on his master's degree and playing football for UND. And in this picture, again, on the far left, we have Ketone. He and his new wife, they just celebrated this last month their first child's birth. Ketone's in his first experience of, you know, the challenges of trying to start his own business, and they live and own a home in Bismarck. On the bottom right in the middle, young lady named Amy is from Panama and married one of my wife's cousins. They met through the friendships that she had with my sister-in-law, and they have a family in Bismarck, and she's a career-driven woman. In the top right-hand corner is my sister-in-law, Tony, and her husband, Julio, who just received his citizenship 2 months ago. He originally was born in Dominican Republic, and that's where they met, and he's here in Bismarck, and we're grateful to have him. So just some examples of some success stories, and I don't believe that their journey is, I believe it's more remarkable than anything I've experienced, and I'm incredibly grateful for my experience. So with that, I mean, what are some of the attributes that I expect as an employer from these students? And I tell you, the labor market's tough, and sometimes we find ourselves simply making concessions, you know, to fill a spot with someone who maybe doesn't have all the right attributes. But when it comes to these students, I can tell you that what I expect out of these people, just the statement they've made in their own lives to step outside of their comfort zone and pursue something for themselves. Words like adventurous, you know, driven, grit, hardworking, those are all things that come to mind, and those are the types of people that we want on our team, and those are the types of people we have on our team, and it's what set our company apart. So I think it's really encouraging to see that, you know, people that become international students, I believe, have these qualities in general. So there are some things that I would like for employers to be aware of that really are good practice, whether you're talking about, you know, employees that are born and raised in the United States or international. But I think that it can really be, heightened awareness can really aid in the success or failure of bringing someone on with different backgrounds and experiences. Just be respectful of the fact that we're all a product of our experiences. And, you know, quite often, if we take time to listen to someone else's story, we can gain a lot of insight and respect to the situation. And that kind of aids in how we train, in how we deal with conflict, or how we even just proactively try to build a team. And so listen to their stories. I mean, back to Bartholomew, I think anyone that gets the opportunity here, that at 16 years old, he came out here by himself with all of his belongings on his back, just looking for something better. I think that gives a lot of testament to his willingness and even some grace to some of the things that maybe he didn't know because he didn't grow up with it. And so really listen to stories, align to strengths, be cognizant of potential challenges, and just be willing to teach. We're only as good as the experiences we've had and the willingness others have invested in teaching us something. So with that, I mean, just again, the value of hiring international students, and Jackson keyed in on it. Number one expand your talent pool, but number two, I really expect that, you know, if I do my part as an employer to Jackson to meet his need, that's building a long-term relationship, and I hope that he'll invest the same kind of relationship in me and my company. So thank you very much for your time today, and I really encourage you to consider these young professionals.
Thank you, Tony. That was outstanding. You've shared a lot of great information about your personal and your professional history and showed us it doesn't matter where you are from. We are all pursuing the same American dream. As Tony said, these individuals are driven and dedicated and going above and beyond to better their lives, which by definition is the American dream. Employers, take note, your organization will benefit just like Mountain Plains if you're willing to take a chance on these students. Our next speaker is Shelby Emdike from University Mary. Shelby has been with University Mary for the past 13 years. She currently serves as the Assistant Director of Retention, International Services. As an alumnus of University Mary, she holds a Bachelor's of Science in Communications and a Master's degree in Education. She has spent the last few years working with international services in a variety of different capacities, including international student services, student advising, student or support services, and matters relative to international student visitors and institutional compliance with federal immigration law. She is an active member of the Association of International Educators. Welcome, Shelby, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Pat. As Pat said, I am the Assistant Director of Distance and Graduate Retention, International Services here at the University of Mary in Bismarck. My main focus and my duties on a daily basis is to work with international students on any part of, or to advise them on any part of their journey throughout their F1 student visa. But today we're going to talk about the curricular practical training and OPT, so that's optional practical training for students, particularly those students who are on an F1 student visa. So those students who are on an F1 student visa, if you're not aware, are students who come to the United States to study. And I think there'll be some other speakers later on that will go into detail of that. But they'll come to the US to study at an institution, and they'll be on an F1 student visa. And when they have that visa, there's certain requirements that they need to meet, and there's only certain things that they're allowed to do as well. And when I get a lot of students here, a lot of them would like to know if they're able to work for a couple different reasons. One, they might want to earn some money for those extra expenses, or two, they might want to work and get an internship to better prepare them for the workforce. And so my answer to them is always yes, you may work. And one of those options, or one of the options they have is what we call CPT. And so CPT, to be eligible for that, the student must be an F1 visa holder, which usually they all are, but sometimes we have students who are not. So they must be a F1 visa holder, and they must be enrolled in full-time. To be a full-time student, they must be enrolled as a full-time student, and they must have been enrolled for at least one academic year, and they must have a formal acceptance of a job offer or internship in order to qualify for CPT. The work and the training, this is where they would come to my office and we would go over the job objectives with them. So the job and the training, they must have an integral part of their curriculum or be an integral part of their major. They must complete the degree program, or they must complete during, it has to be completed during the degree program, excuse me. It cannot be extended after graduation, and it cannot start before they would enroll in school. And the CPT is only allowed for 12 months at a full-time status. So anything that's above 20 hours is considered full-time for that student. So that student really has to be diligent on how many hours they're working and how many months they're going to be working. If they go above and beyond their allowed time, then they, what we call OPT, is not available to them after graduation. And then optional practical training is when the student has graduated. So with CPT, my office would approve that authorization. So if, for example, when Jackson wanted to intern at at Tony's, you know, he came to my office and asked if this would meet the requirements, and I approved that internship. Once he has graduated, then he is able to apply for OPT. And there's 3 types of OPT that students can apply for. There's standard OPT, pre-completion, so that's available to all majors. There's standard OPT post-completion, and then there's STEM extension OPT. Pre-completion OPT, I don't have many students do that, simply because we offer CPT. Students don't really need to utilize the pre-completion OPT. So unless the school doesn't offer CPT to their students, pre-completion might be an option for them. But the most common one that I work with is a standard OPT, so that's post-completion. And that is where the student has graduated, has intentions of staying in the US, and would like to get some work experience. And so, for example, in Andrea's case, she graduated this last May. We started working on the OPT application 90 days before her graduation. She submitted that application to the USCIS, or Department of Homeland Security, and then we let that application process. And so that's a big thing for those students, is that they have to complete the application by themselves with help from an advisor, and they also have to pay for the application by themselves as well. And right now, that application fee is $410 for them to submit that application. And once they submit the application, they may have to maintain working full-time or part-time, whatever they decide to do in that field. And that field of work, they must decide how that field is directly related to their field of study. And the job must be in the US. They don't need to have a job to apply for OPT, but the job must be in the US that they're going to be applying for. And as I said, they can apply 90 days before their graduation date, and they may not exceed 90 days of unemployment as well. So I always tell students it's a gamble for you a little bit, because, for example, if you pick May 1st as your start date, but you don't get your OPT paperwork until May 15th, then we've lost a few days. If you submit your paperwork and get your OPT card on April 15th, but don't have a start date until May 1st, you can't start until that day on the card. So I always just tell students to be aware of that and to communicate with their employers, just that so their employer understands some of those things are out of their control. But if they've planned ahead and done all the things that we tell them to do as F1 students, hopefully they can avoid those obstacles when they're getting to that graduation date. So as I said, OPT is obtained through the USCIS, and it's eligible for 12 months. And it's 12 months per degree level. For example, if someone applied to start OPT as an undergrad, May 1st, they would have until April that next year with OPT. And then after that, they would either need to return to school as an F1 student, change visa type, or exit the country. And if OPT is approved, an EAD card will be issued, and that's just an employment authorization document. And they'll have that, and then your HR department may want to get a copy of that. And then, as I said, the application fee is $410. And I know Andrea was in a unique position because her employer offered to help pay for the application fee. And I haven't seen that a lot, but that's a really great benefit for Andrea. And then the standard post-completion, like I said, is granted to students who will be working after graduation. And as I said before, students must work at least 20 hours a week or more. So anything that's 20 hours or more is considered full-time for them. And the last slide that I have is talking about STEM OPT. So STEM is available to students who graduate in the US and who have bachelor's, master's, or doctoral degree in that STEM field. So it's science, technology, engineering, and math. And so to be eligible for that, they must they must complete a degree within the STEM field and then apply for OPT STEM while they're currently completing their OPT. And students can do this 2 times in their lifetime. So for example, I had a student who completed a technology degree at Dickinson State, came to the University of Mary for his MBA, did OPT with his Dickinson State degree, but did not utilize his STEM. And so when he was done with his MBA at the University of Mary, he was able to then apply for STEM based on that technology undergrad degree from Dickinson, and was able to work an additional 2 years after his MBA OPT. So the paid positions is kind of the same thing, paid directly related to the student's area of study. This one does involve the employer working a little bit too with the student. They have to complete a form called the 983 form. And then the student must report to the DSO every 6 months, just saying that they're still at that job and then what they're learning. But yeah, you know, STEM OPT, OPT, and CPT are all great options for international students. I believe it really provides them a great opportunity to see what the workforce is like in the US, and it really sets a foundation for them in the future.
Thank you, Shelby, for sharing your expertise as it relates to off-campus work for international students. The subject is no doubt complex for not only the students, but also the employers. As an employer, it's important to understand the work opportunities available for international students to gain experience. At the end of this presentation, we'll have campus contact information for all of our North Dakota colleges so employers can get in touch with them to learn more. Speaking of learning more, our next speaker has a wealth of information to share with us today. Greg Dorrington is a partner with the Crowley Fleck Law Firm. He has more than 15 years of experience helping businesses and individuals navigate evolving immigration issues. Greg focuses his practice in Montana, North Dakota, and Wyoming, but he also serves clients across the U.S. and worldwide. He works with businesses providing a full suite of services, including visa petitions, consular processing, labor certification, permanent resident green card applications, and I-9 compliance. Greg helps various industries, including healthcare, manufacturing, mining, hospitality, agricultural, and education institutions with their immigration needs. He also assists individuals, families, and those seeking U.S. citizenship. Greg routinely presents on immigration issues, and he currently serves on the Government Relations Committee on the American Immigration Lawyers Association Asia Pacific chapter, which coordinates with U.S. embassies and consulates abroad. Welcome, Greg. Thanks for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Well, thanks, Pat, and thanks to all the other speakers, and good afternoon to all of you on the call. I'm really excited to be here today to speak with all of you as employers or potential employers who may be curious about the immigration process and hiring international workers. So I've been practicing immigration law for about 15 years, and one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of employers feel like the immigration system is kind of this big, scary, unknown process, and because of that, they tend to avoid it, and they end up missing out on some really great opportunities the system can provide. So I'm here today to try in the next 20 minutes or so to help shed some light on the opportunities presented by the immigration system, and also by the fact that there are numerous international students already living, studying, and wanting to stay and work in North Dakota. What I hope you'll take away from this talk is that even though the immigration process has lots of rules and regulations, and it can be quite a bit different than what you're used to in hiring just a standard domestic U.S. worker, it's nothing to be afraid of or to shy away from. The immigration system can be used by the biggest of corporations and the smallest of mom and pop operations. But it all starts with getting educated about the opportunities that are out there, learning about the process, and seeking out professional guidance that you might need along the way. So I'm really happy to see that all of you have taken that first step in being here, willing to learn more, getting curious, and really just seeing what the options and opportunities are that are out there for you. Immigration law is just a very expansive subject matter area. So kind of given the theme of today's webinar, I'm really going to try and tailor my comments to the various pathways for international students to remain in the U.S. beyond graduation, beyond OPT, and what that means for the employer and how the employer participates in that process, for example, by sponsoring the worker. As we go through the slides, just keep in mind that all the topics that we cover could be full day seminars. So we're really just scratching the surface here. So as a lawyer, I have to do my lawyer thing and give a disclaimer. None of what I talk about today is legal advice, so please don't take it as such or interpret it as such. All right, so let's dig in. So let's start the discussion with the international student for just a minute before we pivot. So as students graduate from their course of study and they start applying for jobs with employers such as all of you, they're going to be looking for pathways for work authorization. And this is just as relevant to employers too, because you can't hire an international student or another foreign national unless they're authorized to work in the US. So oftentimes it becomes kind of a collaborative process between employer and the worker to find a pathway that makes sense for all parties. And there's lots of different avenues for work authorization. In this hub and spoke graphic that you see on the screen, that's just intended to give you a flavor of what some of those options are. They range from employer-sponsored work visas and employment-based green cards, which we'll talk about today. But there's other options as well that don't require employer sponsorship, but can still work or result in an international worker having the ability to work for you. And that includes things like family-based immigration options, humanitarian options like asylum, entrepreneurship, and OPT, which Shelby talked about. These are examples of where the immigrant, not the employer, is doing most of the legwork, but they can all lead to work authorization. So I just want to mention them because the employer doesn't always have to sponsor a foreign worker in order to employ them. But that's what we're going to be focused on today, are kind of those top two circles on the graphic there: non-immigrant work visas and green cards, because those are the most often used pathways for employers to hire and retain international talent. So this slide is a sample progression just to show kind of the usual pathway or life cycle of an immigration case, going from for an international student, going kind of from the point of graduation to permanent residence in the United States. The process usually begins with OPT, which is generally limited to 1 year, but some students, as Shelby mentioned, in STEM fields are eligible to obtain a 2-year extension. But then after OPT, the student's generally going to require some sort of sponsorship from a US employer in order to continue working in the United States. That's because their F1 status, their OPT or STEM OPT are eventually going to expire, and they're going to need to change to a different immigration status to continue living and working here. And we'll talk about what those options are in a minute. Most of the employer-sponsored work visa categories that we talk about later on, however, are capped in terms of how much time a person can remain in the US in that status. So if you do end up sponsoring a worker, eventually that status could expire, and you'll need to either change to a new category or explore other options for a more permanent solution, such as a green card, which is known as lawful permanent residence. So that's just kind of a brief summary of the life cycle of an employment immigration case and the role the employer plays as being the sponsor and participant in that process. Kind of covers maybe the last half or 2/3 of that slide that you see on the screen. So here's a list of some of the common non-immigrant visa categories. I'm not going to read through them. It's a bit of alphabet soup. We'll go through them here in a minute. But it's important to know that they all fall under the category of being quote unquote non-immigrant visa classifications. And so before we talk about the different types and the specifics of them, there's a few things to keep in mind with non-immigrant visas. First, they're called non-immigrant visas because they don't allow the worker to immigrate to the US. That is, they don't give the person the ability to live and work here on a permanent basis. They're temporary, and they're usually granted for increments of 2 or 3 years at a time. And extensions are oftentimes available under the various programs. Most work visas are employer specific, which means if you sponsor a worker, they can only work for you. They can't use that sponsorship to go off and work for a different employer. And so that kind of gives you as the employer some degree of protection and stability, and helps foster worker loyalty and that, employer-employee relationship that Jackson was talking about. None of your visas are also typically for a specific purpose or occupation, meaning you can't hire someone to serve as, say, an engineer, and you can't then go place them in your HR office or administrative support role. You have to stick with the purpose for which they've been granted status. And then finally, you have to be mindful that your worker needs to maintain status the whole time they're in the United States. That means they can't violate the terms of their status. They can't do things that are not permitted by their visa classification, nor can they stay in the US beyond the expiration of their status. So those are some things that the employer, you just kind of need to monitor and keep tabs on to ensure that your worker is compliant. So the first classification to talk about is the F1 OPT classification, which shall be discussed in detail. So I'm not going to repeat any of that. The one thing I do want to highlight is that from an employer perspective, this is an excellent category. It doesn't require sponsorship. The student does all the work in getting the employment authorization. It's a low cost, low risk process for the employer to, in essence, test out the worker, see whether they might be a good fit for the organization. And if they're STEM eligible, you can get an additional 2 years with that worker with minimal effort. So it's a really great status. And if the worker is a good fit and you want to continue the employment relationship, as the employer, you might decide to sponsor the individual for some other visa status. You're not obligated to, but you certainly can. Overall, just a great category and a good way to transition an international student into the workforce and begin integrating them into your company without really committing to full-blown sponsorship yet. One of the categories that you might transition your student worker to after OPT is the H-1B class. This is a highly sought after visa classification that's for professionals working in a quote-unquote specialty occupation. So to get H-1B status, an employer is going to be required to file a petition with USCIS on behalf of the worker. This is what we call or refer to commonly as sponsorship. You probably hear that frequently. H-1Bs are good for 6 years, and they're issued typically in increments of 3 years at a time, with additional extensions beyond that 6 years sometimes being available. As employers, if you're interested in sponsoring workers under this program, you really need to focus on the definition of specialty occupation, which is listed on the slide. Eligibility for an H-1B focuses first on the job position and then second on the beneficiary or the person who's going to fill it. And what that boils down to is that the position being offered to the worker is one that typically requires a bachelor's degree in a specific specialty, that's important, as a minimum for entry into the profession. So this works great for STEM careers and some of the more technical occupations that have a well-defined degree program that provides specific academic training tailored to a particular occupation. And you'll see the examples on the slide, like physicians, engineers, computer systems analysts, geologists, things like that. It doesn't work well for jobs that require a non-specific bachelor's degree. So that means kind of regular business jobs or manager positions and supervisor roles. Those usually aren't going to qualify because they don't generally require a quote unquote specific degree or a specialty degree. The other thing to know about the H-1B is that it's a capped program, meaning there are only so many of these visas available each year, and the competition is increasing year over year. There's now a registration process that happens each March where interested employers have to submit their information, and then the government holds an electronic lottery to see who can apply for visas for that fiscal year, with jobs starting on October 1. So hot tip for those listening, you really need to kind of plan about a year out, start preparing in fall and winter so that you can register for the lottery in the spring for jobs that start the following October. So you really need to plan things out. And also note that there are some employers and employees that are exempt from this cap. And if you qualify for an exemption, it's a huge help. Really opens up the door for H-1B sponsorship. For those employers who are not cap exempt or don't get selected in the lottery, they will need to look for alternative options, one of which is the TN visa. So the TN visa is a treaty-based classification that arises out of what was formerly known as NAFTA. Now it's the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement. You heard Jackson speak about it earlier. And it provides a special visa classification only for professional workers from Canada and Mexico. And the whole idea here is to facilitate this kind of free flow of professional talent across borders. And there's only certain occupations that qualify, and those are contained in a list within the treaty, but include things like accountants and architects, engineers, hotel managers, lawyers. The occupations are similar to those that would qualify for an H-1B in that they're professional positions. Nearly all of them require at least a bachelor's to qualify. So some key takeaways for the TN are there's no cap. So you don't have to worry about registering or lotteries or anything like that, which is great. There's no petition requirement, meaning you don't have to seek pre-approval from USCIS before moving forward. And Canadian workers especially, they can apply right at the border, which is phenomenal. So it makes for a pretty fast, cost-effective process to obtain TN non-immigrant status. Another benefit is that these are typically issued for periods of 3 years in the United States, and they can be renewed indefinitely, as long as the worker can continue to show non-immigrant intent. So it's a great category and something to definitely be thinking about if you have applicants from Canada or Mexico. So the next one is the E3 professionals from Australia. And this one is also a kind of a specialty visa, similar to the H-1B, but it only applies to citizens of Australia. You have to be hiring the individual in a specialty occupation, which tracks with the definition in the H-1B program. The visa is only valid for 2 years as opposed to 3 in some of the other programs. But one of the nice things is indefinite renewals yet again. So as long as you can continue showing non-immigrant intent, the worker can continue staying here and get indefinite renewals of their E3, and there's no petition requirement. So another nice category to kind of keep in the back of your mind if you have anyone from Australia applying for your positions. Now, there's a whole host of other non-immigrant visa categories. So if you can advance the slide, please. For example, the L1, this is a great option for multinational companies to move workers around with their own organization. Practically speaking, you're probably not going to see a lot of L1s in the kind of international student context because the individual has to have worked abroad for 1 year in the last 3 years. I mention it because it's a great program. It's used frequently. So just keep that one in mind. The other one is the O1 classification. And this is really purely for extraordinary ability workers. And you have to, it's a high standard. So this one isn't used a ton, it's used some, but you really have to demonstrate sustained national or international acclaim. So another one just to kind of keep in the back of your mind. So if you can move to the next slide, perfect. So going back to our sample progression here, now we're going to kind of make the transition from non-immigrant visas, which is kind of the middle part of that chart, and now we're going to move towards immigrant visas. So from temporary work authorization to the ability to permanently live and work in the United States. And looking at the progression graphic again, this is sort of the latter part of the employer's immigration sponsorship life cycle. If you get through the green card process, you're not going to have to file any additional immigration filings or extensions or things like that. So what is lawful permanent resident status? Well, it's the ability to live and work permanently in the United States. It's commonly known as the green card. There's lots of different ways to obtain a green card, but our focus is on the employment-based process, and this is going to be based on the offer of full-time permanent employment from a U.S. employer. The process is a lot more intensive than the non-immigrant visa process. Typically requires more filings, involves a deeper level of analysis into the immigrant's background, health history, and criminal history. And there also has to be a visa available to the worker. So employment-based visas are capped annually. There's only 140,000 employment-based visas available each fiscal year, and that's set by Congress. And then those 140,000 visas are allocated between the different employment-based classifications, which we'll look at in just a minute. Actually, if you want to just pop to the next slide, that would be helpful. And then, yeah, so these are the employment-based preference categories, EB1 through EB5. And for purposes of this column and the employers, the second preference and the third preference are probably going to be your most likely categories. EB2 refers to advanced degree professionals, and then the third preference are for professional workers. And in terms of the process, most EB2 and EB3 cases follow the following steps that are shown on the screen. You have to get a prevailing wage to ensure that you're offering or paying that worker something commensurate with what the prevailing wage is in the geographical region. Oftentimes, you'll have to go through a labor certification process. This is also called PERM, which requires the petitioning employer to actually go out and test the labor market by recruiting for U.S. workers in order to prove that there are no U.S. workers able, willing, and qualified to take the job being offered to the foreign national. And if you get past that step, then you can file a petition with USCIS to classify the individual under one of those EB categories. And if you get past that process, then you can seek to adjust to a green card or get an immigrant visa. But this whole process, I mean, this is a years-long process, taking almost 3 years now to complete. So you really do have to plan ahead for these types of green card cases. In terms of the visa availability, that's set forth in what's known as the Visa Bulletin. It's published every month by the Department of State. We're not going to go into detail here, but this is the current Visa Bulletin that shows, for example, the EB3 line shows May 1st, 2020. That means you would have to have a priority date and have some filings in with the government before May 1st, 2020 in order to apply for a green card right now. So these dates move and fluctuate every year, every month. So you really have to kind of keep tabs on that. And then just in terms of some of the takeaways from the immigration process, I mean, don't be intimidated by it. Just learn it, get to know it, find the people to help you, seek guidance early and often in the process if you intend to hire international workers. Plan ahead as much as you can. Explore options for both short-term non-immigrant visas and long-term green card visas. It's nice to have kind of multiple strategies in place at a time, and invest in your talent. It really does pay dividends. So those are kind of the wrap-ups there, and thanks to everyone for attending. This is just a whirlwind run through of some of the most common immigration pathways to employ foreign talent. And, we just scratched the surface, but I hope this gives you at least a little bit of insight into the process, and that you'll continue to explore opportunities for hiring international students and foreign workers that might benefit your organization. So thanks a lot for listening, and back to you, Pat.
Thank you, Greg. That was absolutely fantastic. You obviously have a tremendous amount of knowledge about immigration law, and your information will no doubt give employers something to think about. We've seen the recent articles about how Canada is poaching students who were trained here in the U.S., and I think it's important for all of us to not be intimidated by the immigration process and to do like Greg said, and plan some more. I also want to personally thank Greg for all of his support and encouragement leading up to today. In his words, he appreciates that we were hosting this webinar and he wishes other states would follow our lead in creating awareness around this important topic. We really appreciate you, Greg, so thank you. Our next speaker is another subject matter expert who will be sharing his legal expertise as it relates to the Department of Labor compliance. Nathan Sahovic. Nathan is a native of Watford City, North Dakota, and served for 8 years with the North Dakota Army National Guard. In November of 2022, he was appointed the North Dakota Labor Commissioner. Prior to this appointment, he served as an attorney with a Bismarck-based law firm representing and advising employers and employees. Nathan previously served as an Assistant Attorney General for the North Dakota Office of Attorney General from 2017 to 2020. He earned an associate degree from Bismarck State College, a bachelor's degree in human resource management and business administration from Dickinson State University, and his law degree from the University of North Dakota School of Law in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Welcome, Nathan, and just a quick shout out to Nathan. He is the one who found us our previous speaker, Greg. We appreciate that, Nathan, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat, and thank you everyone for attending today. What a great topic to be covered that I think is not covered enough clearly. Again, my name is Nathan Swihovic. I'm with the North Dakota Department of Labor and Human Rights. And as I was prepping for today, I thought of an interesting, relatable story. And when I was at UND Law School, we had 12 Canadian law students, and that was the biggest we had ever had at UND Law to that time. And they kind of kept to themselves. The Americans kind of kept to themselves. And I said, you know what? We're all pretty close here. We're going through the same struggles. We need to merge these groups. So I reached out to what I was 100% convinced were the Canadian students. And I sent them a group message. And one person reached out and said, why am I in this? I'm not Canadian. And I made the assumption based on the French style of her name, and some other factors that she was Canadian and she was American. So we're all capable of making assumptions that are inaccurate based on preconceived ideas. And so my goal here today is to help you stay truly informed as employers looking to hire international students, because while you should know what you can do, I think it is helpful to know what you also can't do according to the law, in order to make the best employment decisions for your business. So the ultimate goal for my presentation today is to break some of those outdated thought processes that we have with hiring international employees that'll allow you to make better business decisions without the fear of violating any employment laws. Next slide, please. So the big one that comes to play from the Department of Labor standpoint when you're talking about national or immigration is national origin protections. The Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, as well as the North Dakota equivalent law, protects applicants and employees from discrimination based on their national origin. It isn't necessary, and again, and over on the right, you'll see kind of the general categories that make up what would be considered national origin discrimination. And these are things like making business or employment decisions based on someone's appearance, their language, or their customs. Generally, most of the decisions you make, if they fall within one of those categories, you're approaching the realm of national origin protections, if not already in it. It isn't necessary for anyone who's been subject to certain conduct to show that his or her ancestors are from a certain type of nation or a particular country or region in order to prevail on a national origin claim. They can be proved if a person is discriminated against, even just for having characteristics that are generally, whether stereotypically or factually associated with a certain nation. And this extends to discrimination because of a person is even associated with someone who is subject to certain falls within a certain national origin. This also, there are certain requirements that can have adverse impacts, that employer decisions are being made that will impact whether or not you're invoking any national origin protections. So things like employment practices, like citizenship requirements, minimum height requirements, policies against hiring individuals with certain arrest or conviction records. Those kinds of things can tend to screen out people from certain national origins. And so all these little practices that, again, on their face maybe make sense, can somehow have a national origin discriminatory impact. So, like one example that we see a lot is a high school diploma requirement. That's kind of just become standard. Let's check that box. Let's throw it in our applicant. But is it truly needed for the job that you are posting for? Because if it's not, and you have that requirement, and there's certain people from a nation that wouldn't have that high school diploma or an equivalent, you're going to tend to screen out people of that origin. So again, really look at your practices and determine, is it a business necessity? Is it related to the job that you're posting for or hiring for, or making decisions on? Next slide, please. So really the three big categories of where we see national origin discrimination come in is accent discrimination, speak English only rules, and appearance discrimination. And they're somewhat self-explanatory. But really it's if you're treating people materially different based on any of these categories. So we have things where we'll see people say, you know, this is an English only job or profession or duty, job duty. And while that can be acceptable if there's certain requirements, like they're going to be interacting with the public a lot, or they're going to be, you know, taking calls or teaching or things like that, you can have kind of, hey, you need to speak English. But where you can't and where the line is drawn is, let's say that employee's now in the break room and there's another employee of their same nation or origin, or they're calling home, whatever the case may be, that they're speaking their home native language, and employers say, hey, no, we can't, none of that here. This is an English only office. That's going to be really hard for an employer to say that that's business related. So those are the kinds of things that employers can get themselves in trouble with, and they'll want to avoid and make sure that if you're going to have an English only rule or something along those lines, or say, you know, we don't want an accent, it better have some business connection, or else that's probably going to be a violation. We also have the appearance discrimination. So one example that was given that I've seen before is they say a company wants, hey, the person, when you walk into a company, we want the face of our company, the person that you see first, to be this strong, tall, whoever person. And people have been essentially denied that job, even though they were completely qualified, because they didn't necessarily fit the appearance that company wanted to give off. And they can find themselves again in a discriminatory situation, even though, again, they didn't mean to intend to discriminate, or they don't have anything against a particular nation. That practice of preference can also lead to, again, violations of the national origin protections. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. Again, mine is pretty short because, again, really the Labor Department's only involvement here is related to this national origin protection. But there is a federal law called Immigration and Nationality Act, or the INA. And that also can get pretty, an employer can get themselves in trouble if they're in violation of that. And that's protections for citizenship status in hiring, firing, or recruitment. Any national origin discrimination, like we've been talking about, unfair documentation requirements, like requiring additional or more documentation or proof of nationality than is required, and any sort of retaliation or intimidation. And so the Immigration and Employee Rights section of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division works on this, and they take it pretty seriously, and the penalties can be fairly steep. So you'll definitely want to avoid getting yourself into any of these issues. That's really all I have for my portion. It was pretty short and sweet, but what I want everyone to take away from my portion of this is that the best part of these laws are that these are the minimums, and you've seen here today that these shouldn't even come into play, because there are so many opportunities for employers to work with international students and international employees, and you've heard all the benefits of that. And so this is really a, you know, if an employer's not making the right decisions or not looking into how do I work with immigration employees, that you're going to run into these problems. And my guess is those that are attending are already thinking that way. And so it's probably those that aren't attending that need to hear this more than anyone. But there are a ton of opportunities for employers. North Dakota just passed a law. We're going to have an Office of Immigration, or at least there's going to be a study on it. The Labor Department is here to support you if there's any questions as far as any employment related matters, but particularly as it relates today to any national origin questions you may have as you're navigating some of the complexities of these hiring processes. We're getting out there, we're raising awareness, we're going to SHRM conferences. We want to work with employers. I want to change the Department of Labor's perception from being the let's get people in trouble agency to the let's help them not even get there in the first place agency. We're very approachable. We'll answer your call, email, text, anything you guys want to do that you have questions on, please reach out. Thanks for participating. This is a big step already for you. And thanks, Pat, again for hosting this.
Well, great information, Nathan, and I thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. I know we have thrown a lot of information at all of you today. 2 students have shared their stories. We had Tony sharing his personal and professional experience. We've heard about opportunities that are available to international students, as well as the various pathways that students could potentially take towards permanent residency. While Nathan has shared information on the protections in place for workers, I think our message today is clear. These international students are talented, skilled individuals, and hiring an international worker has many benefits. To emphasize that point, our next speaker is going to talk about the business case for hiring international students. Jason Sutheimer is the HR Director for Job Service North Dakota, where he leads human resource strategies and programs. He's also an adjunct HR professor for the Dakota College at Bottineau, past State Director of North Dakota SHRM, Government Affairs Chair at Central Dakota HR Association, Vice President of the International Association of Workforce Professionals, and serves on numerous HR-related boards. He holds an MBA with an HR concentration from the University of Mary, bachelor's degrees in Management Information Systems and Business Administration from North Dakota State University, and he is certified as a Senior Professional in Human Resources, SHRM Senior Certified Professional, and a Certified Workforce Professional. He has also co-founded Disrupt HR, Bismarck, and he is also a recipient of the Prairie Business Magazine's 40 Under 40, a North Dakota award for professional excellence in human resource management. Thanks for joining us today, Jason, and I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Pat, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So to start off, just starting the business case, we all know that we've had difficulty recruiting and employing individuals, and our workforce demographics have been tight throughout the state. So let's just take a look back and look at how we got to the situation that we're currently facing. So looking back into the early boomer and the impact that they had on our labor force. So going back to the World War, of course, during that time, women became more involved in the workforce. And because of that, and working outside of the home, the labor force grew exponentially due to this increase. In addition, there was also the U.S. experienced increased birth rates. There was improvements in technology and education, and this aspect nearly doubled the workforce. So, what happened now and in the shortage? A lot of times we hear about COVID and the impacts that COVID had to our workforce. But looking back, a Manpower survey showed in 2020, February 2020, that 70% of businesses reported this talent shortage. However, looking back at the same survey back 5 years ago, the survey showed that even then, 32% of businesses reported having difficulty finding talent. So is COVID to blame for this lack of workforce, and did it contribute to the increased shortage of workers throughout the nation? So looking back, what we've seen and looking at the demographics, we don't believe that COVID is a simple issue for this. However, it's simply that history and society are catching up with us. COVID wasn't the result, but it did really expedite the process of some of the things that we're seeing, such as boomers retiring, because during COVID years, approximately 2 million baby boomers retired, and that was an increase of 1.1 million that we had seen before COVID. So looking next into some of the demographics and some of the issues that are facing our current workforce, what has happened now with the labor force? Currently, in regards to the women in the workforce, back in 1948, the women labor force participation rate was right around 30%. However, in 1990, that had increased all the way up to 60% by the mid 1990s. And then again with COVID and through that experience in the pandemic, 2.4 million women left the workforce. And that was typically because they have been caregivers and are looked at to be that primary caregiver for the family. Men in the workforce and their labor participation rate in the 1980s was roughly about 94% for prime age males. That prime rate means individuals from 25 to 35 years old. However, in 2019, that had dropped down to 89%, which was a decrease on approximately 7 million men, prime age men leaving the workforce. Looking back at some of the statistics that revolve around men, in 2014, more prime age men were living with their parents than with a spouse. And that statistic is the first time that has happened in the US since 1880. In addition, about 860,000 prime age males were declared unable to work due to the opioid addiction issue that America is facing. Looking at the current boomer impact, boomers are currently retiring with an approximate average of $1.2 million household worth. And this is the richest that in American history and that America's ever experienced. So with that, one consequence of that is millennials have inherited approximately $68 trillion from their boomer parents. And the assumption is that by 2030, that will negatively decrease the workers because millennials are not going to be forced to work. So how do we look at changing this issue and this shortage? So looking at it, one of the ways to do that is birth rates. So looking at birth rates, it takes roughly about 2.1 children per woman to ensure that we have a statistical replacement rate of both working parents. However, in 2019, our birth rate had hit a 35 low, and our population and the growth in the US was only 0.35%, which is the lowest recorded growth rate since America began. And experts are predicting that the national population is set to decrease by the year 2062. Other things that kind of have impacted our demographics are industrialization. With industrialization, children, during that period were forced to be a financial contributor to the family. Again, with the boomers increase and their salary that they're getting and their wealth, that's no longer an issue. Urbanization has increased the cost of living. It's created smaller living quarters. And as people move from a rural setting to an urban setting, the need for more people in the family has decreased because those children are not needed to be workforce on the family farm. And again, secularization. Looking at secularization, individuals with higher religious affiliations have more children. However, that attendance in religious organizations has been plummeting over the last 20 to 35 years. So, and lastly, the decline and delay of marriage. Currently, in the 1960s, the first time age of somebody getting married was in their 20s. Now that is up to the late 20s and early 30s. And marriage rates in 1960 were at 72, and in 2020 they hit an all-time low since that statistic has been collected since 1867. So looking at this, looking at global impacts, we can kind of get a feel for what's happening in the US because Japan and Europe have seen some of these same issues that we're currently experiencing in the US, and their trends tend to be about 10 to 15 years ahead of us. So looking at them, that will give us an idea of how we can do that. So looking at some of the next solutions that we have, you can see that it's going to take time for a lot of these solutions to resolve the issue that we're facing. The increased birth rate, immigration, technology, retention, reskilling, recruitment beyond traditional means, all of them will take time to come to fruition. However, the easiest one that we have now and that we should be looking at to help solve this is our immigration aspect. So looking at the current schools and the number of students that we have, and as you noted on the front page, we had roughly around 2,400 international students in the US. North Dakota has 33 SEVIS certified schools, both primary and secondary, which is high schools and colleges. These are the list of colleges. Then taking a turn and looking at what in-demand occupations are in North Dakota. The North Dakota Workforce Development Council puts together a list every year, and we can see by these in-demand occupations, we have education, engineering, finance, healthcare, IT, management, etc. And then when we transition into some of the most common majors and the most popular majors for international students, we'll go to the next slide, and it will highlight those in-demand occupations. So you can see that of all those top demand that the North Dakota Workforce Development has highlighted, only sales, skill trade, and transportation are the ones where international students are not as popular as they are. So hopefully this shows why it's important, why immigration and looking at international students can be a quick win for companies. Of course, they're not going to completely remove that and solve the issue, but this is a great start and part of the long-term solution for organizations overcoming that shortage of workforce development. So with that, I will turn it back to Pat.
Well, thank you, Jason, for pointing out that the shortage of workers is not a new issue. It wasn't the result of COVID or one single factor, but it will require employers to utilize various strategies to fill their vacant positions. And a quick win right now is hiring international students. I think some of or most of you have heard that during our last legislative session, there was a lot of discussion from our legislators on immigration and forming an Office of Immigration right here in North Dakota. We are pleased to have our next speaker here to tell us more about that journey. Jana Pasteur is the Deputy Director of Workforce Development for the North Dakota Department of Commerce, a position she's held since August of 2022. Prior to joining the Department of Commerce, Jana worked for the North Dakota Department of Health, where she specialized in policy and system strategies to improve the workforce participation and the experience of people living and working in North Dakota. Jana, we're excited to have you here today. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Pat. I'm excited to be here. Like Pat said, I'm Jana Pasteur, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Workforce Development Division. I'm going to just try to be as brief as possible because, as Pat indicated, this Office of Legal Immigration is incredibly new. In fact, it's only 39 days old as of today. But the first objectives that the office does have is developing and implementing a statewide strategy that's going to support recruitment and retention in the international spheres. Our requirements are to advise and make recommendations to the governor. This includes the Legislative Assembly during interim and session times, and then development of a pilot program. That remains to be determined how that's going to run. And then we'll be partnering with other states and have already been partnering with other states and other agencies to develop and administer programs that will just grow impact versus duplicate already existing services. The initial tasks of the office, we're very excited to say that we're about to release the request for proposals for an entity to help us conduct a comprehensive study of immigration in North Dakota. And that study will include employers, students, the universities, community organizations, all of the groups that we already have working inside of North Dakota or with North Dakota to improve the workforce training and education available to new Americans, and supporting businesses that are currently using international recruitment to help fill their jobs. This study is going to help us create a long-term framework. And so we really hope that anybody that's interested in being a part of it will reach out to be engaged as stakeholders. And we hope to officially kick off later this fall after that vendor has been selected. Some of our potential collaboration opportunities, or I should say not even potential because now we are staffed in our office, is to work with universities, the colleges in North Dakota, and employers in North Dakota. We hope to use this office to help identify pathways that will foster inclusion of our international students into our workforce during and after their education here with us, creating easier pathways and easier connectivity between those students and employers and opportunities that we have here. Through that, we hope to increase the utilization of Find the Good Life North Dakota, which is an existing platform currently used for national talent attraction. And it has already, even without the marketing to do so, unintendedly gathered about 200 international individuals that are interested in immigrating to North Dakota to work. And we will be able to start sorting through those and getting them connected to employers. We hope to connect students with communities, not just employers, where they can be successful, where they can integrate and feel included and purposeful in their time with us here in North Dakota. And then connecting employers to the current national and international students, which we have talked about at length today as an opportunity that we have. Our additional tasks will be coming up after that study or throughout the course of the study as it's being conducted and themes start to emerge for us, is developing that pilot project framework that's required in the legislation. That framework, we are hoping, is going to support businesses that are hiring and employing global talent, the communities themselves where these individuals are coming to work and live, and then also the individuals and families that choose North Dakota as their new home. The purpose for this office is to help foster immigration and integration for those individuals when they're here. And then the study will also hopefully help us identify other long-term goals and activities and tasks that this office will be allowed to do based on those results. And I said we are 39 days old. We have our first official staff member. Her name is Paige Maxon. Actually, Paige Koontz, she got married, so that will be updated, and I will make sure that the email addresses are updated as well. But watch the North Dakota Department of Commerce workforce pages for new information and ways to get involved with that study as it is being conducted later this fall. And then myself as the secondary contact for this office moving forward. And that's really it. That's our update.
All right. Thank you, Jan. I'm excited to see the work being done on this important topic. More to follow for sure. Before we end our time together today, I'd like to just go back to my story about how this topic first came up. I was very moved by Andrea's story, so much so that I had to tell it. I'm proud of Andrea for being bold enough to share her story with me and to come here and share it with all of you. Thank you, Andrea, for choosing North Dakota and for shedding light on this opportunity. I want you to know that we hear you. This webinar today was inspired by your kindness, and I anticipate that this interaction and collaboration will most certainly make a difference in the state of North Dakota. So even though you are pursuing more education in Virginia, I want to make something crystal clear. When the time comes, we want you back. At this time, we may open the chat just for your general comments, but I'd like to thank our webinar sponsors today. They have been instrumental in bringing an important message to all of you, and we couldn't have done it without their collaboration and partnership. So thank you to all of our speakers. I also stated earlier that we would share the campus contact information with you as we share the university system, as shared by the university system. If you want this now, feel free to take a picture. Otherwise, we will include this document in our Q&A response and distribution with all of you within the next few weeks. The chat is open. I realize we're running up on the end of our time together, so if we aren't able to get to your questions today, we hope that you will submit them via our email, jsnd_webinarquestions@nd.gov. And again, we'll provide a response and send to all of those attending today's session. Last but not least, thank you all for attending today, and thank you to the North Dakota SHRM State Council for offering recertification credits. Information on how to add credits will be sent directly from ND SHRM. So thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to see some questions and comments and your feedback on today's webinar.